To most people, the Great Wall of China is just, well, a really long wall. And while this may be true, the reality is that it is one of the most complex structures ever built, and in some ways, far more sophisticated than many modern fortifications. So today, we're going to be giving away some of its ancient military secrets for your entertainment pleasure. But before we do, if this type of content interests you, we're happy to announce that you can receive early access to videos and live chats with the creator of Intrigued Mind by subscribing to our Patreon. Your support will greatly help us keep the channel producing more intriguing content. So, first things first, how long is the Great Wall? Well, we should first correct a common misconception by saying that the Great Wall isn't actually one wall. Instead, it is believed that the Great Wall is made up of at least 16 walls, with each being built at different time periods by different emperors. You see, the very first people to threaten the Chinese Empire were the Xiongnu. Hailing from the area around modern-day Mongolia, they were skilled horsemen and were known for conducting raids on the Chinese Empire by sending in archers on horseback to terrorize villages and towns on the frontier. By the 5th century BC, the Xiongnu were becoming a real threat, although it is believed that sections of wall first began to be built up all the way back in the 7th century BCE. While we do not know for sure which emperor began the initiative, what is clear is that over the millennia, more and more sections of wall began to be built up in defense of the Chinese Empire. At this point, most wall defenses were being built up in the Gobi Desert, and they weren't being constructed in one straight line. Rather, there was a series of walls that would defend certain valleys or passes that would be easy for horses to pass through. The other areas were covered by massive guard towers that would hold hundreds of Chinese soldiers. At the first sign of Xiongnu invaders, these horsemen would spring into action, helping to ensure that the non-walled-off areas of the desert would not be penetrated by adventurous Xiongnu cavalry. The wall was also a lot different than what it looks like today. Rather than built out of bricks, this ancient version was made out of mud, although even this simple-looking structure was actually quite ingenious. Using triangle stilts to ensure that its height and width were perfectly constant, it was made by pounding slabs of mud between sheets of straw, as this would then harden and form together to create a strong and lasting wall. In order to keep out invaders, this 6-meter-tall mud wall also had spikes in front of it, meaning that charging horsemen would not only have to traverse the often deadly spikes, but do so while Chinese soldiers rained arrows down on them. For all intents and purposes, attacking it was a death trap. However, it is here that we get to our first secret about the wall. You see, for years, it has been wrongly believed that the wall was solely a defensive fortification. Yet, during this time period, it appears that the Chinese would often use it as a starting point for attacks. In fact, ancient records seem to indicate that the Chinese Empire were the aggressors more often than the Xiongnu. Yet, despite this being the case, this narrative has more or less been ignored by both the Chinese government and many historians. Another interesting secret that has only recently come to life was the wall's ancient signaling system. Discovered by reading records that were inscribed onto pieces of wood, this system was both secretive and ingenious. You see, while the wall was linear, for 400 kilometers past the wall, the Chinese set up a series of guard towers and poles that all ran 90 degrees to the wall. At first sight of the Xiongnu, the first tower to spot them would make a secret signal. For example, 1 red flag would mean 50 soldiers, 3 red flags, 200 soldiers, and if a bonfire was lit, it would mean that 1,000 soldiers were coming in the direction of the wall. Unfortunately, being one of these signaling soldiers was a deadly job. After all, while their signal would be passed along to the other towers in the 90-degree line until it reached the wall, there was no way for these signaling soldiers to retreat. As a result, they were at the mercy of the advancing Xiongnu army, and given the fact that there were usually just 3 to 5 soldiers in a signal tower at a time, they were often slaughtered during the advance. It was between the 14th and 17th century that the Ming dynasty built up the Great Wall into the massive marvel it is today. At this point, many more walls began to be built, and instead of being made out of mud, the walls were now being constructed out of brick. It was also at this point that the walls were built to their maximum extent. During this time period, about 8,800 kilometers of brick wall was built. Taking about 100 years to build, this brick section ended up being about 7.5 meters tall, 99 meters wide, and filled with about 25,000 towers. This was so expansive that it stretched out from the Gobi Desert in the west to the Yellow Sea near the North Korean border in the east. When considered alongside the older walls, the entire expanse of the network is an incredible 21,000 kilometers, which for reference is longer than the distance between the North and South Pole. And while all 21,000 kilometers were not constructed during the high period of wall building, a lot of it was, leaving one important question: how exactly was this wall made? After all, it took millions of bricks, and to get it all done in just 100 years was no easy feat. The answer lies in what is essentially the creation of a manufacturing revolution. On the front lines of this revolution were the laborers. Often pressured or forced to migrate north to do this grueling and deadly work, the laborers consisted of soldiers, slaves, and commoners, and the way the materials they used to build the wall in record time are quite incredible. If you visit the wall, one of the first things you'll notice is that unlike Western buildings, the mortar is white. When Westerners first visited, they asked about this and were told the popular legend that it was made using the crushed bones of the laborers who died during the construction process. And while that's not actually true, what is true is that the mortar was made using a peculiar mix of materials. Rather than rely on mortar made up of a mix of cement and sand, Chinese laborers used a mix of limestone and, of all things, sticky rice. While this may sound a bit sketchy, the reality is that mortar with a composition of about 3% sticky rice is highly shake-resistant and stronger than modern mortar, making it an incredibly durable material. This was complemented by the standardization of bricks. Made using a network of hundreds of kilns and thousands of laborers, these would churn out bricks at lightning speeds. It was because of this efficiency that it was at all possible for the wall to be built. Yet, who exactly was the wall defending against? By this point in time, the Xiongnu were out of the picture. Now, the greatest threat were the Mongols. Found in the Mongolian steppe, they were not all dissimilar to the Xiongnu. They were extremely skilled horsemen and had the means necessary to mount strong attacks. In the past, the Mongol Empire of powerful leaders such as Genghis Khan had to attack alone. However, by the 16th century, the weaker successors to the once great Mongol Empire had new allies, the Manchu. These were people from modern-day northeast China, and while they lived just outside the wall, when working in tandem with the Mongols, they were an incredibly strong force that could challenge the integrity of the Great Wall. In order to effectively fight these new invaders, the Chinese devised many secret military strategies and traps. One incredible tactic was to use small holes in the walls to drop rock bombs on enemies. Filled with either gunpowder or noxious chemicals, these would explode on the troops down below, scaring horses and causing complete devastation. Along a similar line, tripwires that set off bombs would also be set along the outside of the wall so that soldiers would be blown off their horses as they advanced. If for whatever reason, it was decided that some soldiers had to be sent beyond the walls, there was a secret network of tunnels that allowed soldiers to attack invaders by surprise. More specifically, tunnels throughout the wall would lead to areas that were covered by a thin layer of bricks. If necessary, Chinese soldiers would quickly break down the bricks and run out of the wall at their attackers, surprising them and allowing for shock assaults on the enemy line. And it should be noted that as a last resort, if enemy soldiers did somehow manage to scale the wall, it was possible for Chinese soldiers to barricade themselves in one of the wall's watchtowers, keeping them safe and allowing them to regroup before launching a counteroffensive. However, while the Great Wall was certainly effective at preventing invasion, it was eventually bypassed. You see, in the mid-1600s, the combined threat of the Mongols and Manchus began to be too much for the Chinese Ming dynasty, as they eventually began to conduct raids beyond the wall. This came to a head when in 1644, the commander of a section of the wall surrendered, opening the gates to allow the Manchus to stream into China. The end result was the replacement of the Ming and the establishment of the Qing dynasty, and from that point forward, the Great Wall no longer had to be used as a border defense. From then on, it fell into disarray, and while it was manned for ceremonial purposes during World War II, it was only around the mid-1950s that reconstruction efforts began in earnest. So, there you have it. We suppose it's fair to say that the CCP isn't the only secretive thing to be found in China. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel. Like the video and leave your suggestions in the comments below.